Namaskar. Welcome to Uday India Digital. The right angle today will be discussing or rather focusing on China. As you know, China is very much in news because of the COVID. It has not been able to control. But from our point of view, while that is of course a matter of great concern, China is dominating news in India because on December 9th, the Chinese troops crossed the line of actual control in Arunachal Pradesh. There were tussles between our troops and their troops. You all know subsequently what happened. Things are under control. Our defense minister has spoken in the parliament. The point that I am rather going to highlight is not exactly why this thing took place, because this is nothing new. It has been taking place periodically over the last few decades. On the other hand, what is more important is this timing, particularly when the Chinese President Xi Jinping is under tremendous pressure, or rather is relatively in a weak position for his inability to control the spread of COVID all over China. And we have heard there are some internal tussles among the various leaders, and he is not fully in control. So what precisely happens, if any student of foreign policy or international relations will tell you that when the leaders are insecure or relatively insecure at their homes, they divert the public attention and create a crisis outside, like in a war, or make a war-like situation, and that is the best way to divert the domestic attention and create, or rather mobilize public opinion, and thus results in some sort of solidarity behind that leader. So if you go by that theory, is it really because of that on December 9th this latest round of clashes took place between Indian and Chinese troops, and Chinese troops crossed the line of actual control? I think there are some merits in this theory, but in my considered the view, I think it is something more than that. And for this one has to see the history in the sense, as you know that India never shared border with China, never ever, historically speaking, because we had a buffer state called Tibet. India shares borders with Tibet, not with China, period. But the point is, Tibet was occupied by China forcibly in 1915, and after it occupied, it so happened that we, for the first time in the history, now are sharing borders with China. As you know, not exactly way back, in 1914 there was a famous Shimla conference, and in that Shimla conference, the boundary between Tibet and India was delineated, and it was called the McMahon line. The Tibetans accepted it, but the Chinese representative in that conference did not sign that. As a result, and because why Chinese representative was called there, because they say that Tibet was under the Chinese suzerainty, in the sense that not exactly Tibet was a part of China, but Chinese suzerainty means it is little more sort of thing, in the sense that historically that Tibet was under control. Suzerains are not sovereign. The sovereign power was very much within Tibet. So what happened that when the McMahon line was drawn, the Chinese subsequently said, after particularly occupying Tibet or annexing Tibet, said that they will not accept any unequal treaty. Unequal treaty in the sense that when China was weak, that is the Chinese theory, the other powerful countries of the world had signed some agreements or some sort of decisions which China had to accept because it was weak, but now China is no longer going to accept them because they are unequal. But then this is such a faulty argument in the sense that as far as India is concerned, China says that they don't accept the McMahon line, but then they accept the McMahon line in Burma while they settle their boundary dispute. As you know, China shares boundaries or borders with land border. When I am talking of boundaries, land borders with 14 countries, and out of these 14 countries, it had really fought wars regarding this boundary with 3 of them. One was Korea. That time, of course, now Korea is divided. Now North Korea is the one which shares the border. But that in 1950 there was a major war, and that in Korean War Chinese did intervene. And then the second major war they had fought over the boundaries was with Russia, and that was in 1969. And the third major war that they had fought was with Vietnam, and then fourth major war that they had fought, that was against India, because as I said that though we historically never shared border with China, it was only with Tibet, but after the annexation of Tibet, China became our bordering country and neighboring country, and unfortunately that's a different story. So the point is, they say that China has made more or less this, or rather settled these boundary disputes almost with all the countries now except India. But here if you go a little deeper, they have got a very funny principle. I think not exactly one principle, there are 3 principles. If they think that the state that shares border with them is relatively more powerful, they will be making concessions very easily, and that is how they perhaps then in 1969 settled that border problems with Russia from relatively a position of weakness, and then they made some concession. There were of course some give and take, but broadly it was done. The second principle was that where they think that they are not that weak, but they are not in a position to fight a war, the best thing what they could do is you claim major portions of the land, claiming that they belong to you, and then when you sit on the negotiating table with them, then you say that look, we want brotherliness, we want good neighborliness, and that is how we are prepared to make concession, because we want to settle this border issue once and for all. And then once we do that, then we will be giving you some economic incentives, we will be investing heavy money in you. So that is precisely how they settle their border disputes with maximum Central Asian countries. Central Asian countries in the sense like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, they have done that. They claimed, suppose for an example, that is 80,000 square kilometers. But then they said that look, though we have 80,000 square kilometers of our land that you are occupying, but for good relationship, we are surrendering that thing, we will be happy with 10,000, and then after that we will be investing so much of money, and we will be giving you the other assistance and things of that sort. So that means they will be projecting themselves as a benign power, a very helpful power, that who sacrifice the thing. That means you see the deviousness in this tactic. You know that you have only, for an example, say 10 square kilometers of yours, but then you claim that 100 square kilometers belong to you, and then in the ultimate analysis you say that okay, I will be happy with 10 square kilometers, I am giving up my claim of the rest 90 square kilometer. I think this sort of deviousness they have resorted to and settled their border problems with many of the countries that they had, as I said, that 14 countries. But why it is not happening in the case of India? That is the most interesting part, because here it is not exactly a question. As you know, again, if you go by little by history, we had a major war in 1962, and but in that war, particularly in the eastern sector, they had totally taken over Arunachal Pradesh, but they went back after, suppose, October 24th, I think the war took place in November, something nearly a month, they withdrew all of a sudden. But in the western sector, that is means the Ladakh sector, they kept a lot of territories, and earlier also they are occupying. As I said, that that controversy all the time was there, that McMahon line thing, that Aksai chain was already there with them. But apart from that, they occupied some more territories there. But then, as I said, by devising or by projecting this devious theory, they in 1960 had given this proposal that we will be giving up our claims on the eastern sector as long as you accept our claim on the western sector. But that's a different story why Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Indian Prime Minister, didn't accept it, because there was no political consensus prevailing in that period. And I think when Deng Xiaoping came back to power and was the most powerful leader in China, in some form this package was repeated. That was in 1980. But again, there was no consensus in India's part, on India's part, because I think our parliament had taken a stand. We have to recover every inch. Under Chinese occupation, it becomes very difficult, and then we did not accept that package. But then after that, what has happened? Now if you look at it, the Chinese seem to be more keen on grabbing these territories in the eastern sector, or rather expanding their claims of territories in the eastern sector, which they were prepared to give up totally through this package deal, and keep their things as it is in the western sector in Ladakh. And here it is not only a question of their strategic objective. I think that is more political objective in the Arunachal part, because here what happens is this thing, because there is that Tibetan factor, means the Dalai Lama, the authority of Dalai Lama. As you know, that Dalai Lama is the supreme leader of the Tibetans. He is still regarded very highly, not only outside Tibet, but also within the Tibet, though it is under the communist control, and their religious life, cultural life, and economic life have been totally destroyed by this communist models of governance. What happens is this, that the Dalai Lama is an institution, in the sense that this current Dalai Lama is 14th Dalai Lama. So they nominate, before their death, who the next Dalai Lama will be. So there is a fear in the minds of the Chinese that Tawang, where exactly is the major area of friction or dispute in the western sector in Arunachal Pradesh, because Tawang had historically very strong relations with Tibet. One of the Dalai Lamas, I think it was the fifth Dalai Lama, he was burned there. It's not that the Dalai Lama always have to be from Tibet. There have been two Dalai Lamas who have come from outside Tibet. One was from this Tawang in India, another was from Mongolia, if I am not mistaken. So the Chinese think that most probably, because Tawang is essentially a Buddhist, like the rest of the Arunachal Pradesh, it is a Buddhist majority state, and Dalai Lama and the Tibetans have got historical, cultural and strong economic links. Maybe he will be nominating his successor from Tawang, and if that happens, then it will create a lot of problems for China, because Chinese say that the next Dalai Lama will be recognized or decided by them, not by the Dalai Lama, who is alive. So there is that a bigger political objective. So Arunachal Pradesh or the eastern sector for China has become now more important. So that really explains the reality. But reality is also little deeper than that, because suppose I'm making a hypothetical point, and that hypothetical point is that everything is fine as far as India and China are concerned regarding their border, there is no dispute, it is settled. Will China ever be a friend of India? I think that is the mother of all questions. That is the mother of all questions, because historically and civilizationally, China and India have always been rivals. Because in the south, as you know, that 300, 400 years ago, the entire part of Southeastern Asia, there was always a tussle between the Chinese culture and Indian culture. You might have heard this term Indo-China. Indo-China means Indo-China consists of three countries, Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. Why it is called Indo-China? Because these three countries are the countries where the Chinese culture and the Indian culture, they met and clashed. And that's why if you go to these three countries, you will see many Chinese cultural legacies as well as many Indian cultural legacies. So they can, and then come to the present day world. Present day world, everybody talks of multipolar world. The Chinese always believed, they had that historical their middle kingdom theory. What is the middle kingdom of theory? Historically they think they are the most supreme race. Their country is the best in the world, because China has been created by God in himself, and it is between the God and the rest of the earth, so that it is a middle kingdom, and the all other kingdoms or all other countries must pay obedience. And so that is that concept of middle kingdom is. So in this sense, so it is a continuation of that legacy. Even in today's world, when one talks of multipolarities, China is one of the leading countries which demands this multipolarity, in the sense that they do not accept that world will be led by America or world will be led by Russia, because then multipolarity concept came because during the Cold War there are two poles. The one was Russia, another was United States. They said that no, there will be multipolars, there will be various poles. There will be, instead of one or two, there will be 10 or 15 important countries all over the world who will be from almost all the different parts of the world. But here, a country which is spearheading this theory of multipolarity is saying that as far as Asia is concerned, we will be the only one pole. We are not prepared to see countries like India, which have got equal or rather in a way more historical claims to become or emerge as one of the most important countries in the world, to be a pole. It will be only one pole, that is the pole of China. So these are this tussle between India and China simply cannot be explained in that territorial terms or political terms or economic terms. This is the basic, if really one wants to go, India and China can never consider India as a friend. It always will consider India as a rival. So that being the case, we should be realistic enough, not get mesmerized by those erstwhile slogans like Hindi China bye bye. No, there will be such classes because it is done 1962. We are not going to listen to what the Chinese say, and we are not going to make compromises as dictated by China. And our armed forces are quite capable of giving the Chinese a very befitting response. So that being the case, there will be many more such classes. So what India should do now? So obviously you have to increase or enhance your strength. We must spend more money on our military. We must build better infrastructures in our areas near the line of actual control. And secondly, controlling China doesn't mean that you have to control them through the land borders, or rather meeting the Chinese threat also means you have to strengthen your maritime power. That means the Indian Navy has to play a very important role, because the Chinese strength comes from the Chinese economy, and Chinese economy means China has to export its products, and that is through seas, and that is through Indian Ocean. So when one talks of the modern war, there are various dimensions of it. So the best way to control, or rather not the best, as important it is to strengthen your army or air force near that line of actual control, but equally it is incumbent on India's part to strengthen its navy. And secondly, because this Chinese hegemony is something that India alone is not suffering from. Almost all important countries of the world are also realizing this, and that's why we have these associations like Quad, and where friends like Japan, Australia, and United States, we all are now together and to meet this sort of Chinese threat. So two best solutions, I'll say, that we have to enhance our military power, and then we have to strengthen our relationship with our friends to take a combined strategy, or rather to face the Chinese threats together. India has to develop its own strength, military strength, as well as India has to work together with other friendly countries to deal with the Chinese hegemony. Thank you.